Hello, we are Badly Needed and Long Overdue, a controversial podcast about Colorado Springs. It's controversial because it makes sense. I'm your host, Nick Raven, and hanging out with me virtually is my co-pilot and navigator, Emily Lewis. Emily, how are you doing?
I am well, Nick. Thank you. Very excited for our guest tonight.
I am so excited about our guest, and I hate to break this to you, but we have broken a record.
Ooh.
This is...
What did we break?
Oh, yeah, let me tell you. This is now our second episode of Badly Needed and Long Overdue.
Yay!
I think we need a pizza party and a bottle of champagne.
Yes.
And we need to just really bring in, like, not the new year, but something really close to that, like the next Tuesday or something. Really excited about how far we've gotten. Yes, you're absolutely right. Our guest today is Stephanie Vigil. She is basically I guess by the time this airs, the primaries will be over. She's in an uncontested race. She's going to be the Democratic candidate for Colorado House District 16.
Yes.
And she has a lot of cool opinions and facts and policies that she's already ready to go, and we're going to hear so much about those as we go along. I do want to make a quick disclaimer. I've known Steph for years, since 2018. Gosh, it's been that long. And I am actually also part of her campaign team. I help her with digital media. I'm a body man. I take pictures and that. So I work with her on her campaign. But even then, here in the interview, I'm able to learn a lot. And I know you guys are going to learn a lot. And we're going to have tons to talk about as well.
Yes.
So.
Yes. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah. So did you have any thoughts before we get into the interview? I thought it was really fun. We're talking about rent.
It was...
Rent. We're talking about rental prices and renters' rights as well.
Yes. Yep. So make sure you grab a pen and paper or whatever, and there's some stuff you want to write down.
Absolutely.
Stuff you're going to want to know as a renter in Colorado Springs.
Absolutely. And we're going to put some of that stuff in the description if you're watching on YouTube. Mm-hmm. We'll put it in the show notes as well, which I'm just going to copy and paste between the two because I'm so lazy. Anyway.
I'll make sure that we have some links and stuff in all of the social media.
Yes.
As well.
Absolutely. So,
all right,
with all that said, let's get into our interview. This is Stephanie Vigil. Let's get going. Phew. Stephanie Vigil, Steph Vigil, thank you so much for being with us. You are our first guest on this Badly Needed and Long Overdue podcast. We should all be dancing. This is all very exciting right now. And this... make it buried in the trivia pocket of whatever website that this is posted on. But you're the one who came up with the name for the podcast. I was like, so I've been batting around the idea of making one for a while, and it's like, I can't find the time. I can't do that. And then it's like, you know what? We should actually just settle in and figure this out. What's a good name? And Steph pops out of the woodwork immediately. Badly Needed. What about Badly Needed and Long Overdue? And it's like, you can't start a show with a showstopper, Steph. And, props to everyone else who hopped in there and gave names. We got some really cool names out of it, but it's they were all kind of rated against. So everyone got a really cool participation trophy for showing up. So thank you, Steph, and welcome.
Well, the funny part is I wasn't entirely serious until after I hit send.
Right.
And said, what would be a good title for a podcast like that? And of course, Nick, because Nick and I, go back a few years, and we both have just a deep love for this city. That I often find myself, and Nick and I have talked about this, kind of pitted between, these extremes of people who are like, keep Colorado Springs lame. I like that I'm, like the weird edgy one in this conservative city. And then also the people who are like, I hate how much it's changed and grown, and I wish we were back to the way it was in 1995. That's when it was its best. And I'm in the middle just going like, I love us no matter how we are. This is just the hometown of my heart. I'm happy. I love it here. And I want it to be the best that it can be. So when you had mentioned, like what would be a good podcast name for us, I just thought, other than like badly needed and long overdue, like, I don't know. I hit something, I was like, oh, actually, maybe you should call it that. And I kind of, as it was turning around in my head, I was like, oh, actually, yeah, you could really work with that theme, because we also there's also a lot in the city that we need very badly, and it's long overdue.
Yes.
The transportation, the housing, taking care of our, getting back to basics as far as taking care of our natural environment, because that's the actual roots of this city, is taking care of our natural environment. But
yeah, we've got so many unfunded liabilities, so many opportunities, and I'm going to tell you what, this podcast is going to be a great outpost for you to visit if you want to listen to and hear us talk with people about what the city is needed, and where we need to go as we're getting so darn big. Like, oh my goodness. I actually wanted to open up specifically, again, I mentioned it before the podcast that we kind of wanted this to be a timeless thing, but I wanted to get into the news today about the shooting in Texas at the elementary school, and it was 18 confirmed dead.
Yes, 18 children.
18 children confirmed, and then 2 adults, and that really rings. So I honestly, I felt triggered by the whole thing on the way home, because of Columbine. Columbine happened just up the street, and that was 15, and we're up to 18, and unfortunately, this is just going to disappear as soon as anything changes. And but by the time this episode comes out, we'll know obviously a lot more. But I just wanted to express my sadness, and I know that we're all having the feels today. Because what happened, and it needs to fucking stop happening. So,
yeah,
this was...
I mean, we're not even necessarily doing, like an episode about, they're not even necessarily doing an episode about gun violence or about public safety or anything like that. But it's like, I think as we start to dig into today's topic, it's kind of hard to miss the parallels there, where we just don't care about each other. We just aren't valuing human life and health and happiness and flourishing. Because we are living in the imagination of white colonial men, as they say, and what is valued by a very thin sliver of ridiculously powerful and well-moneyed people in this country. What is valued by them is the creation of new wealth so that they can take more of it. And
obsessively.
I'm not saying we don't care about anything else, but it just all ends up being subordinate to that. I think it's the reason that we have, I don't know, maybe like a housing market that's more interested in maximizing profits than in keeping people housed.
Yeah.
Well,
has something to do with it.
Yeah.
Well, exactly.
Emily, what are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Well, I was telling Steph a minute ago, the parents from Sandy Hook have reached out to the parents of Robb Elementary, because really in this nation of school shootings becoming so very common.
Yeah.
This is only the second elementary school. I mean, come on, it's just 2. It's fine. It's only 2.
Compare it to GDP with other countries.
Yeah, exactly.
Look at the school shootings to GDP. That'll.
It's It sounds like the shooter was very closely mirroring the actions of the Sandy Hook shooter. He shot his grandmother before going to the school to decimate a classroom of children. And it's interesting to hear the news anchors that are speaking about this. I can't recall who I was listening to today. When it all first started, and they were talking about, that there were 14 injured children.
Yeah.
And, of course, they cut away to talk to one of their, people on the scene. And all of a sudden, the anchor cuts back in. And you can tell in his voice that what he's getting ready to say is going to be heartbreaking. And he announces that, Buckface Twat Waffle has announced that 14 children were dead. And, I grew up in Texas. At 5 years of age, we were given rifles. That's what they did. That's what they did. This falsehood of, first and foremost, only Republican people own guns is absolute bullshit. And the narrative of, a good guy with a gun, because now, of course, they're talking about, well, let's arm the teachers. That sounds like a super excellent plan. Let's not pay them and fill up their classroom with 65 children and give them a firearm. Absolutely nothing can go wrong there.
Right.
Right.
Well, and what really struck me is that, and it occurred to me later in the day when I heard the initial reports, they're like, well, it's like, 2 confirmed dead, but like 14 wounded. My mind immediately went to like, well, if it's that many wounded, they're probably all going to die, because if they have wounded that many people, they probably have an AR. They probably have a semi-automatic. And if you have a semi-automatic, you are inflicting gun wounds that typically they cannot save people from, especially very small children. So
Yes.
And then I was like at a coffee date with a friend, and we were just kind of talking about this as like we're moving on, and I was like, I hate that I know that.
I know.
I hate that I know. Why is that something I need to know?
Well, and I mean, a semi-automatic can be a low caliber weapon, but it's just if it's that many so quick. I mean, if you're going in there with a Marlin long rifle, a 22 Marlin long rifle, you're not shooting that many people that quickly. You're not injuring that many people that quickly. So yeah, you do need a higher caliber, faster rifle.
And we're talking about,
and they're not bullets for defense or for hunting. They are bullets for warfare. And
I bought it for target shooting.
okay, you know what? That's when your targets are people. That makes sense.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
And because we're talking, again, this is the hardest thing for me to understand and to continue to wrap my head around, is we're talking about 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders.
Mm-hmm.
These are, like 7, 8, and 9-year-olds. These are tiny humans. And it doesn't take a lot.
No.
It doesn't take a lot.
No.
So yeah, something has got to be done. And arming teachers is not the thing that needs to be done.
Yeah. And I want to talk, I really want to talk about this more in depth when things are cooled down a bit.
Yes.
And emotions are not ready.
You'll probably want to cut some of this. I'm sorry, it's not housing related, huh?
No, we're don't worry, we're gonna come back to that. But I really feel that we're kind of setting a tone here as well. It is contemporary. We're not usually going to talk about the news, but this happened just hours ago, and it really did feel relevant. So we are going to talk about gun control. We're going to talk about gun policy, absolutely, and obviously we'd love to have you back for that, Steph, as well. Especially
Yes.
as you are on the road to state legislation. So
Yes.
so I'm very excited
We
about that.
might be able to recommend you somebody, even a little bit more qualified to talk about that and mix up your,
I
think that needs to be a panel.
I think we're gonna bring in some really cool people, even more cool people as well. But
Yes.
let's wander back here. Let's find our center here. Steph, how did you get to Colorado?
Yeah, and I should probably introduce what I'm doing here. Not just like a random person in a very nice cat shirt. I might add, I wore my nice cat shirt.
Well, I will say that we actually did introduce you in the show, so everyone does know who you are. But I want to hear it from you too.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, I was not lucky enough to be born in my hometown, as I often say. I had to get here on purpose. I was actually moved here once against my will, or at least not. I was a teenager, so not by choice. In 1999, after growing up in Michigan, and lived here until about 2007 or so. Moved to Chicago for 7 years, and then moved back here. And in that intervening time, I just had like extraordinarily poor mental health when I was living in Chicago, and kind of found myself caught in that cycle of, there's just sort of this vicious cycle of poverty and illness that if you've ever gotten caught in it, you can't work enough hours to support yourself without getting ill. And if you get ill, there's no paid sick time. You don't have health insurance. If you go to the hospital, it's even worse. It's a good way to lose your job and then lose everything.
Yeah.
So I went through that spiral for quite a while. I'm a survivor of childhood abuse and neglect. I grew up in a radical fundamentalist community, with just the way my family was. And that did a lot to me, and I didn't really get a chance to unpack it until I had an opportunity to breathe a little bit, right? So our humble social safety net, combined with some assistance from my siblings, kind of came together just in time for me. Part of that was moving back to Colorado Springs. So like many people throughout the years, I came to Colorado for my health. In my case, I came back to Colorado for my health. And I think I actually just I'm not a very spiritual person. I don't really believe in supernatural things, but there is something about this space that resonates with me so deeply that I just feel attached to the city and to the geography, and to the complexity of the people here. And this was a big part of my healing, was coming back to Colorado Springs. So getting a chance to kind of unpack what I had been through and what my core injuries were gave me the opportunity to go into long-term recovery, get healthy, start to thrive. And right around the time that started to happen, the 2016 election cycle was underway.
What happened then? What?
I know, right? I had never really gotten involved in politics before. I had some ideas about things, but again, vicious cycle of poverty and poor health. I was not out like knocking doors for Obama in 2008, although I did go to the big celebration thing in Grant Park, which was amazing.
Wow.
So I wasn't like getting involved with elections or anything then, but somewhere in the course of that election cycle, I thought, you know what? Of all, I love my country, and I'm not going to let these like really radicalized and mean-spirited people tell me that loving America means hugging a flag. I think loving America means taking care of it. And so I'm going to do something to get involved, like regardless of who wins this election. I have a fire under me now. And I also have been through some things that I see how people get left behind, how we have like severe inadequacies in our life support system, right? We're focused so much on maximizing wealth for people who already have it and growth by any means necessary.
Yep.
And we're not getting a good quality of life for everyone out of it. And we could be. And I got some headspace to start thinking about that because I had the opportunity to take a break from working full time. And I thought, well, I got to get involved in politics somehow. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm going to keep my ear to the ground because, there's got to be something going on here. I don't know anything about our local politics. I started knocking doors for a city council member who is now on city council, my good friend Yolanda Avila. And it kind of just got out of hand from there. Now I'm on my second run for the state legislature. I don't know how it happened, you guys. I really don't. I mean, I do, but it can escalate pretty quickly once you decide that that's the groove you want to get into, and that's what you want to be doing with your life. So I expect to win this second round and become a state representative and start my first session January 2023. So
that's just around the corner. I used to say your political ambitions remind me a lot of Tattoo Fever. It's like you get really scared about that first one, and then you get the first one. It's like, man, I could do a lot more of these. What other? Okay, but and by the way, I will say that we did not plan for both of us to have Dr. Peppers as our.
So I'm actually drinking. I am very Colorado here.
Oh shit!
I'm a brew enthusiast, so I've got my new Belgian Mountain Time, but I'm drinking it in an upslope koozie.
Okay.
Because
you're more patriotic than I am.
Spread the love. We like to spread the love in my household for our Colorado beers.
No, I totally get you. Where's my Colorado stuff? It's over there somewhere. I've got Colorado Half Marathon medals. Yeah, there we go. That's
Steph. I need to text you afterwards about something that related.
Okay. We'll take this offline.
Yeah, can we put that in the parking lot? We'll come back to that. So you've been in and out, and we talked about it in our introductory episode where we introduced ourselves, which you have obviously not seen. But we talked a bit about just loving the city and falling in love with it. And you said specifically, you're not a religious person, you're not really a spiritual person, but you just feel a connection. Like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is when I'm supposed to be.
This is home.
Yes, 100%.
None of us are native.
Yeah, none of us chose to be born here. We didn't sign the little thing in the womb that's like, yo, where do I want to be born? Yeah. So we can't get that
home.
sticker.
I have left and come back and left and come back and left and come back. But I always come back home to here for all of its stuff.
All of its idiosyncrasies.
Yes, which is one of the reasons why I think it is so important that we fight to make our home a welcoming place, and not just welcoming for, the retired military, old white dudes.
Because that's how I got here. I was my dad was Air Force, and so we were stationed out here, and so we kind of fell in line. This was my first moving out here. This was my first time. My parents rented a house out in Village 7, so that's where I've spent kind of most of my life, honestly, was up in that Village 7 suburbia, grown trees by then, houses that were built in the 70s and 80s, and that was my first time, I want to say, where I lived, where I wasn't on an Air Force base, in kind of that enclave of the very conservative Christian military tribe thing going on there. And so it was interesting to be exposed to all that. And yeah, this is home. I've seen it. I have all the stories now of, oh, well, they didn't have anything east of Powers when I got here. They didn't have, and that was all fields. So there's been a bit of a crisis growing over there. I mean, Colorado Springs has always been more expensive than, say, Nebraska. But it's in recent years, especially with COVID, especially with wealth consolidating to, the top 10th of 1%, it's really hard to live here. And I think we all have stories about how we have been kind of struggling to get by, as rents have skyrocketed, as real estate has gone insane. And Steph, I'd love to hear your story about how things have changed and affected you in the past couple years here.
Yeah. Oh my God. So I can go back to the first apartment that I got in this city by myself. Was a studio apartment on Wasatch downtown with like radiator heat, and it was It's a ratty old place. I haven't been in there in ages. I'm sure it's probably still kind of a dive. But honestly, those kinds of apartments are important too, because they're low budget, they're no frills. Like, as long as it's not unsafe or uninhabitable, people need that, right? It's basic. Do you guys want to guess how much I paid for rent with utilities included in that apartment? It was $2,006.
Probably.
Was it just you?
300 and 400.
I was gonna say 300-400 there too.
Not quite that low. So it was $450.
That's still really good. Yeah,
it was $450 with utilities included, and then a better opportunity opened up for me, kind of right around the corner. It was technically a 2-bedroom apartment, but it was basically one of those goofy add-on structures, like added on to an old Victorian house, that was like 4 equal-sized rooms, and 2 of them were supposed to be. Anyway, I just lived in it by myself. That was fun. Yeah. That was $500 a month with utilities included. And so now it's like. So I live in a rented house now, a 3-bedroom house with my husband and one of my siblings, and we're working on another roommate right now. And this is like 20. What did we pay here? Like $2,100 a month, roughly.
Oh my God.
And this is actually like $1,000 more per month than my brother and his family pay for their mortgage for like a 3,000 square foot house in Briargate. Because they got locked in there, a few years ago.
That's
so yeah,
absurd.
I've just watched it go up and up and up and up and up. And I was like double checking the figures today before we got on here to make sure like nothing has changed drastically since the last time I checked. But like the so-called market rate for a 1-bedroom apartment right now in this city is $1,400 a month.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's $1,400 a month.
Yes.
I don't know if y'all have done the math on what you would take home from, say, a full-time job at the local current minimum wage. If you assume that this is a minimum wage job that gives you a solid 40 hours a week and that you never have to take an unpaid day off, you will bring home maybe $1,800 with that job. So like not even remotely enough to cover that, and actually not even enough to cover the cheapest studio apartment that is available, because even that is going to be at least, and I know it would be at least $900. We've shopped recently, they're $900 or more. Like for a crappy no frills studio apartment, it is at least $900. That is insane.
Yeah, I remember my friends and I got.
Sorry,
it was bound to happen.
That's what having a dog is. It really.
Hey.
When my friends and I got a house together on the east side, Peterson and Constitution, right? So like relatively new homes, and it was 3 bedrooms, unfinished basements, 3 levels. Or 2 levels and then the unfinished basement. And I want to say between the 3 of us, we paid like $1,200 or $1,300. And we had so much space. It was like you could have people over. And I thought that was kind of pricey, even though I was only paying, $400 a month for my dedicated bedroom and access to basically that, and then an unfinished basement. And I thought that was insane, because that's back when you could see you can remember the billboards. It's like Challenger Homes starting at $300. And it's like, oh, those luxury palaces are it may as well be made out of ivory or something, like something terrible and rare like that. But
used to be able to you could buy a brand new recently built 3-bedroom home in like Cimarron Hills, Stetson Hills, out there off the Powers corridor, and they were starting even in I want to say as far back as or as recently as maybe like 2003, 2004. You could get one of those for like $130.
Yeah, exactly.
For $130.
Like the house we lived on in Village 7, I want to say it was like a house built in '85. That was probably like $150, $200. One of my former coworkers, her parents' house, like half a mile south from there, is going for $500. Yeah. And it's like, oh my God, what in the world is going on? And so many things have changed. since then. And unfortunately, the city has not met the rubber with the city. The
No.
leadership has not met
Right.
the road at all as far as what's going on for people living here. And unfortunately, a lot of the feedback that I see, I mean, obviously I do see a lot of compassionate feedback about helping people out, renters assistance. I've certainly received renters assistance in the past year, and that has been truly a blessing. But there's also a lot of feedback about, well, why did you move here then? You know, can't be having all those people from California or whatever coming out here, and that's not a solution to anything. It's actually not even a problem, but whatever.
No, because the issue is not how many people live here. The issue is if you cannot work a single job and afford a place to live, that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
You know, I like so many other Gen X, I have a kid still at home and my elderly parent lives with me. Between 3 adults, you know, we're barely making it. My rent in my 2-bedroom apartment, yes, it is downtown, but it also has 0 amenities. I don't even have a dishwasher. I don't have a garbage disposal.
I don't either, so that's okay.
Is $1,400 a month. That doesn't include utilities. And it's an okay place to live, but not for $1,400 a month.
Yeah.
And that's even with the location too.
Yeah, when I was living downstairs in the same building, it was a 1-bedroom. Now understand, when I say 1 bedroom, it was, you walked in and it was the kitchen and then the bathroom and then the bedroom. It was this big. Nick saw it. It was super tiny.
It was very small. Half of it was the dog.
And yeah. And I was paying $835 for that. And then when the building got bought, when it was time to renew my lease, they were going to be charging me $1,350 for this apartment.
Which is absolutely insane.
You know, for $50 more, I can just move upstairs.
It's absolutely nuts that we, among other things, this community, this leadership still embraces the notion that housing is just a commodity to be bought and sold, and the invisible hand of the market will take care of that. And, you know, regardless of the suffering that happens as a result, eventually things will work out because, you know, eventually homes will probably fill out. But that's not how that works, because there's so many empty homes that are literally just assets like paintings that are sitting empty, purchased and empty, and they're just going to be turned into rent. They're going to be rented out. They're going to be flipped at some point. And there's like no ownership. And I know you've talked to some of the people really in charge of our homelessness initiatives here in town, Steph. But there really is no sense here in town that housing is a human right, that the housing authority has any. There are programs in say like Berlin and that where cities are buying homes at near or below market rate just to have them available for people to eliminate or ameliorate homelessness, because people should have a home, but also they shouldn't have to spend more than half their rent, their paychecks on that. Like, how many people, if they started doing all the checks today, would have 3.5 times rent in income to pay for their 1-bedroom wonder box? It's insane, Stephanie.
No.
Yeah. Well, so we have to unpack this a little bit, right? Because we were all like, oh my God, like it's insane. It's so much more money. It's so much more money. Well, here's the thing. We've had a little bit of we've had a lot of inflation over the last couple of years, but like we haven't had a level of inflation or increase in overhead costs for for building, property tax, any of that for this many years to justify this increase is what I'm saying, right? So so you kind of have to ask yourself, well, where's all this extra money going then, right? Like if you're talking about somebody moving into an apartment that cost $600 just 5 years ago, and now it costs like $9,000 or $1,000. Where's the extra $400 every month going for every single person who's living there? Well, it's not going to overhead.
Yeah.
It's going into somebody's pocket. And we know that like these things actually aren't that difficult to track. It takes a little time, but you can kind of look into like, what's the property value? What's the cost to maintain it? All that. And nothing's getting like so completely remodeled to justify that kind of cost increase. And also we know, Nick, from your property manager and from the one that I've had in the recent past, they actually don't have to jack up the rent that much every year. That is a choice.
Yeah.
Because we have been in situations where they didn't do it even while everybody else was. And I know they're not cutting into their profits because that would put them out of business. So this whole notion that like rent just sort of naturally goes up because the market forced it to is just nonsense. It is a choice. They are jacking up rent because they can, not because they have to.
Right.
So
like they're leaving money on the table. It's like,
well, yeah. But I kind of use these little air quotes about the market rate, and I just kind of I hate to even say the phrase out loud because it's so silly. That to say that the market rate is $1,400 is for a one bed. That is shorthand for the what's the phrase they use in real estate. It's such a terrible phrase and I hate it. But they say that that's the price that the market will bear. And all that means is that is the cost that you can get away with charging without the unit being vacant because you can't find somebody to do it. That's all that means. Which is like, well, if we have enough limited, if we have a limited enough supply, of course it'll never be empty. If people are desperate enough, of course it'll never be empty. That doesn't mean that the people can bear it. That doesn't mean that our community can bear it. That doesn't mean that families can bear it. That just means the market will find a way to make a buck on it, right? Like it basically, you won't lose profits by charging this much for the apartment, so you may as well do it. And if it weren't
so crappy,
if it weren't in an economic framework where we just, by default, we value property rights and we value people's ability to profit off of that property, like just by default, we would never tolerate that, right? Like we would consider that scalping in any other context, right? Like if I went and bought 100 tickets to a show and then I tried to gouge people for it at the door, like people hate that, right? Like we see that for the scam that it is, but we just sort of allow it when like banks and landlords and property managers are doing it because I don't know, they've been doing it for so long. We're already on conquered stolen land. Time is a flat circle. I don't know, right? Like we're all tired. And I think
we're all tired of fighting.
It comes down to, because I do go out and I knock on doors and talk to voters and I call and text and do all the things you do when you're running for office this cycle and the last. Right. And usually what people want to hear from me is something like, well, what are you going to do about this? Which is a fair question to ask. And I don't have a short answer because in this country, we have a federal government, we have state governments, and then cascading down from there, you have a county, which is actually a subdivision of the state. And then if you live in a city, if you live in an incorporated space, you also have a city government or a town, township or what have you.
Which is us.
So in our case, there are several layers of government affecting what's going on, like in our little space right here, right? It's the city of Colorado Springs, El Paso County, the state of Colorado, and the United States of America, as well as a absolutely mind-boggling array of special districts overlapping where we live.
Yes.
Like metropolitan tax districts and especially around the new areas, which is a sort of a really perverse thing. It's like, well, we need some sort of incentive for developers to keep developing. So why don't we give them a quasi-governmental entity in which they can appoint all of the people they want to this board that answers to themselves. And then we have a city auditor who will peek in every so often, and they can charge basically what they want to cover their infrastructure costs. It's absolutely insane.
It's a private government. And they also, curiously, they can tax you. They can tax you even though you have no representation there, which, if you're keeping up with, that's taxation without representation. That's where we're going with that.
Where's a harbor to throw some tea into?
Curiously, they are not Tabor compliant, which is fascinating to me. We could do a whole thing about Tabor.
I'm sure. Oh, Tabor. I love it.
We plan on it.
Yes.
I'm sure, yeah, for sure. But the interesting thing is that even like conservatives and Republicans in the state who love Tabor, they just kind of turn a blind eye to metro districts not complying with Tabor refunds. They can just take your money and they don't have to give anything back when it's an overage. And they they don't have to follow any of the same rules that our elected government we expect of them. So yeah, there's this whole thing with all these districts as well. So, we're talking about not having the kind of leadership we want in the city. Well, part of the complication with that, and I found this out just going and talking to my former city council rep, who's actually rather conservative, that in order for them to rein in irresponsible development in the city, they would need to have a cooperative county commission. Because we are surrounded and in fact have like enclaves within Colorado Springs of unincorporated El Paso County.
Right.
And sometimes what will happen, oftentimes what has happened is that if a developer is not getting what they want from the city, all they need to do is cross the line, find a patch of dirt that they want. I'm simplifying a little here, obviously, right? Find a patch of dirt that they want, go to the county commission and say, this is what we want to do there. And they'll give it to them.
Yeah.
They basically always do. And in one like really notable instance, which unfortunately has kind of dropped off the news over the last couple of years, there's a developer who did exactly that. He built a couple hundred homes, detached single family houses, didn't want to build in the city because he didn't want to follow their rules for utility hookups, curb,
regulations,
you name it, all kinds of things, right? That we require because, we're a community and you can't just profit on the need for homes here without leaving an end product. I hate to even use that word, but a product that's going to serve the community beyond the sale that you make to the first buyer.
Everyone gets a dirt road.
Didn't want to comply with those. He got everything he wanted from the county. He built it, and then seriously, like a month before he was about to close on all of the sales to those 200 homes, he goes, "We don't have a wastewater plan here. We need the city to annex this. We need the city to annex this spot because I'm about to sell all these homes. What do you want me to do? Tell these people there's no sewage, And so the city did it because they were like, well, what are we going to do? Like they're still our constituents because they live here now, or they're about to live here. They're still going to be like voters and taxpayers, so they did it. But they ended up orchestrating this whole intergovernmental agreement about how annexations are done that do not apply, unfortunately, to enclaves within the city, but outside of the city's borders, specifically to prevent another one of these scams from happening. And it still isn't foolproof, but like that's what it took because they don't necessarily work cooperatively. And as we've most of us on here have experienced at some point or another, the difference between what the county will do and what the city will do and like an emergency say is very different. And Nick, you live right next to one of those
little enclaves. Yeah. Now if you're in one of those enclaves, you're pretty much set and you can kind of avoid that because most of those enclaves, it's really weird. If you're not familiar, just drive up Union after Woodman for a bit. There's it looks like farmland for about half a mile or so, and then you're back into civilization with the gas station and Briargate and stuff like that. So those areas are pretty well spoken for, and the mayor's talked previously about, well, why don't you just annex all those places? And before, and I can't remember the ballot initiative where we overwrote Gallagher, which managed property taxes. They're like, it would cost more to update those enclaves to city code than we would get in revenue back. And granted, that's like this interesting way of looking about using the city's resources to pay for things, about profitability and money coming back, and that's one thing. But still, that, like, Cimarron Hills, that entire area, people think, oh, it's Colorado Springs. No, the post office says it's Colorado Springs. It is under the jurisdiction of El Paso. If you have an issue, a criminal issue in Cimarron Hills, guess who shows up? It's the El Paso County Sheriff, which when we lived on the East End, that's exactly who showed up. It's like, what? So there's a bunch of these little things, and this is only going to get more complicated as we start developing into Banning Lewis, because you had all those developers that leapfrogged in and around up Woodman and stuff like that, where they're going to be like, yo, those subdivisions in Peyton, of all places. But anyway, we're going into, we could talk about this all hecking day, but the point is, we're not developing enough homes. We're trying to densify downtown, but there's really,
Yes, we are.
There's really no hunger to sit there and look at all this R1 housing that takes up like 75 to 80% of Colorado Springs' real estate, and say, let's get those additional dwelling units in there so that another person could live in there in these big backyards that aren't being utilized at all except for to waste our water and stuff like that. So Steph, I'm really curious. You mentioned, like, this is a complicated thing. There's so many jurisdictions at the state level. Like, what's the first thing we can talk about? And I will actually just really quickly, I'm so rude, but there was a story that popped up on my mom's feed, of all people. There was a story about how someone in Scottsdale, their rent jumped 800 plus in a month as part of their new lease agreement. And I'm like, yeah, that's why we do stuff like rent control, so that the profiteers don't sit there and do that. And then, of course, another family member was like, oh, here's this article from this conservative think tank that says that rent control is useful. And Emily, I know you've got a point here, so I'll get to you, and then we'll get to Steph.
Please do, though. I want to see what you found about this, and then I do have things to add, probably, but we'll see.
Well, the thing with rent control, what I'm struggling very hard to understand is everything you read about rent control in Colorado. All it will tell you is it is what did they call it? Hold on, let me look. I want to make sure I get this ridiculous phrase right. It is called. It is a special. My printer cut off the one little sentence. Basically, it is acknowledged that rent control is something that we really need to look into. And then it is kind of put in this little box and put on the shelf to look at as this special thing. This is rent control. We're not going to open it. We're not going to touch it. We're going to let it sit there so we can look at it and pet it sometimes. This is
so fluffy.
Yes. However, no one is willing to stand up and be the first one to say, let's take it out of the box and see what we can actually do with it.
Yeah.
And we're reaching a point quickly that if we do not get some kind of rent control, we are going to be a city, a state of unhoused people.
Right.
Other people can absolutely come and live in our homes because we're not going to be able to afford them.
Oh, who cares about living in our homes? Just own the homes.
Well, even just owning the homes, it's.
So there are a lot of
thing,
myths about
yes.
what rent control is, and what it can be. So the status quo in Colorado at the moment is that rent control or stabilization of any kind, including mandatory inclusionary zoning, which is considered a form of rent stabilization, is forbidden by state law. So, which means
Yes.
even if a local government wanted to do it, state law forbids it. That is the
100%.
And the court upheld that in the Telluride decision. I think that was 2000, maybe 2000.
Oh, the
It might be
Telluride
going far
decision.
back. That's the one. Yep. So,
They
but
need
here's
to
the
look
thing.
at that.
That can be this can be changed in state statute by a simple act of the legislature. We could repeal the state ban on rent control and stabilization, so that local governments can do it. It would not force them to do it. That would be a very different thing. Nobody has on their agenda, even the most, because I obviously I talked to other progressives, even the most like all out for housing rights, but nobody wants a statewide mandated rent control measure. That's not a thing. So, number one, we can repeal that without any danger. All that it allows is that if local governments would like to enact some form of mandatory inclusionary zoning or rent stabilization, they may do so.
Yes.
So, what does that look like, though? So there are a number of different ways that you can stabilize rents. I think a lot of people have in their mind the concept of the first generation of rent control, which actually started World War One. The first round of rent control in this country was in New York, and primarily because what had happened was a lot of people went off to war, and when a lot of people went off to war, a lot of country dwelling individuals and families moved into the city looking to fill jobs that had been vacated,
like the tenements,
and also
and that.
it was a whole it was a whole shakeup in the economy, because wars often are and disease often is, right? And so there was a skyrocketing rent problem, and the city decided that, okay, that skyrocketing rent isn't because it suddenly costs so much. They're charging that because they can get away with it. So we need to tamper down their first big effort there was to just cap the amount of rent that you could charge for a property, and kept it that way for quite a while.
Yep.
That is first generation rent control. The new gen of rent stabilization, because that's a better word for it.
Like rent control had an update.
Right. We don't have to do it that way. And we wouldn't. That's silly, right? I think people conjure up this image of a 3-bedroom apartment with beautiful hardwood floors and glorious molding and everything that somehow is still $400 a month in the year 2022. Nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about capping rent at a certain amount and you're never allowed to raise it. So rent stabilization looks like is that there is a ceiling to how much you can raise the rent from 1 year to the next, based on a variety of factors. So it could be something we could make it totally foolproof if we could set aside all of the all the fear mongering and the myths and everything that are basically just used to empower the very rich. Set all that aside for a minute. Those people really just want to get away with charging as much as they can in rent, and they don't care whether you're housed or homeless. So set that aside for a minute. We could do a form of rent stabilization that would say, cap rent increases so that they can't be more than some single digit number of percentage
like 3%
points over inflation. Right? We don't even, that was the thing. There was there was a big debate about this in this last legislative session, or maybe it was last year, that we couldn't possibly do rent stabilization. You couldn't even keep up with inflation if we did that. No, we can, because you can cook inflation into that figure. Come on, we're all grown. We can do this, right?
Right, we're adults.
So we could set it so that you can raise it, but not no more than a certain number of percentage points over inflation. And the only other way that you could do more than that is if you do capital improvements on the property, which means you have to prove that you have actually done a remodel before you say it's a remodeled unit, it's worth $300 more per month now, or something like that.
Like a new staircase.
Will be I slapped on a coat of paint and it's been rehabbed. That's maintenance, basic maintenance.
The new staircase.
So,
we can do all that. You can there are even programs we could set up for that, where say you could do no rent increases for 5 years. And then make up the difference in the next year because you decided to go ahead and replace all the flooring or something like that, and have it be scheduled. It really would not be, it does not have to be something that even costs people their profits. And that's a weird thing for me to say. I'm not like super gung-ho about people making a profit at any cost, but we actually don't even have to put their ability to make a profit.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't.
It can be intelligent. It can, and unfortunately, the lack of political literacy, and especially around something as essential as having a roof over your head when it's hailing like it is outside right now, the idea that it has to be subject to the free market.
As we both look out our windows, is it hailing?
Yeah, well, what's going on? The captain got really excited. He jumped into the blinds. But this idea that housing isn't a human right and the market should be able to do whatever it want. Like if they wanted to charge $3,000 a month, and the market was willing, I mean, who cares if you're out on the freaking street? I mean, you should have gotten a better degree instead of underwater basket weaving. That's what everyone's doing down at the state, communities, not the communities, Pikes Peak State College.
Right.
Yes. I believe that's the official name now. Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
Talking about, you should have gotten a better degree. Let's just jump in. Let me just poke that for a second. I have a degree in business and accounting. Now, you're not going to find a more stable, it's a business and accounting degree. And I can't pay my rent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is, let's not even begin with, you should have done. It is not my fault. It is not your fault. It is not Steph's fault. It is no one who lives in these spaces' fault that they are gouging people for the sake of making their own money. The apartment that I live in, the reason Nick and I were making fun of the new staircase. My apartment building installed a new staircase in the front of the building. That is, it looks like it was built by a seeing impaired 3-year-old and then built by syphilitic monkeys. It is insane. It bows out in some places.
The imagery is
It's-
classic.
The stairs, none of the stairs are like an equal amount apart. It's crazy.
That structurally sounds?
I've tripped once or
No.
twice.
No, it is not. Now, understand, the units that people moved out of, they have all been, they are gorgeous. They have granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, including dishwashers. Everything else, the 3 full-time residents, units that are still here, because everything else has been turned into an Airbnb.
Yeah, and that's another issue. Yeah.
The 3 apartments that have full-time residents, one of them has not been remodeled since the early 1980s. Mine at least has new flooring. Everything else, so you can't tell me that this was done because, look at our beautiful new, newly remodeled. No. Those are the Airbnbs that are newly remodeled.
Yeah.
And last time I checked, and I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, somebody let me know. If you only have 8 apartments, 5 of them cannot be Airbnbs.
Oh, they can do whatever they want. I mean,
Well, no, because
unfortunately,
I
there's
am
nothing
downtown.
in the. I know, but there's still only so much. Like I think they should be assessed. I think they should be assessed as commercial spaces.
Yeah.
But
Which was that was the fight a couple years ago here in town, because before the pandemic and inflation and this entire rental crisis, we were struggling with Airbnbs because you'd have people coming in, swooping in, they're snowbirds or whatever, they're here less than half the year, and they're like, yo, we're going to let these college kids come in here for days, weeks, months at a time. And there was absolutely an issue of it kind of undermining the fabric of Colorado Springs neighborhoods, because you had all these transients who did not give an F about what they were doing, about interacting with anyone, about manners, I guess.
Making a mess and leaving.
Making a mess and leaving, absolutely. And so we had to say, like, yo, you have to live here most of the year. But they did. I don't believe they went the full step of we're going to tax this as though it's a hotel, essentially, because the hotels were like, yo, because Airbnbs did to homes what Uber did to taxis, and that was a whole mess all its own. So Stephanie, I know you have some backgrounds about like even the Airbnb stuff, and rentals and that.
Well, so, right now, you can buy up as many houses as you want, or apartment or whatever, and especially with like the standalone houses, because you can just own it and say that it's your home, and just use it as an Airbnb, and have it be an entire business which I'm not, by the way, nothing against that. If you want to run a bed and breakfast or run a motel or whatever. However, the purpose of Airbnb, it was set up for, what it was set up for was to enable you to have a side hustle with your spare room or carriage house or whatever it was that I lived in a city that had carriage houses for a while, where people turned carriage houses into like accessory dwelling units, right? There aren't a ton of them in Colorado Springs, but they're here.
Yeah.
It was not really intended to become a platform for people to start a small empire with. And so if we are still zoning and taxing and assessing those as residential spaces, then we're going to keep having this problem, because it's basically allowing people to start a short-term rental business without being regulated like a business.
Yes.
And if you are one, you should be one. It's not, it's just it's a matter of classification, I think, at the end of the day. And that is trickier than it's been in the past, because the law that we're working on was not set up for this level of technology. And another example of this, because I'm in this industry, I'm a gig driver. I drive for third-party delivery services, not even for them, really, because I don't work for them. That's the whole point of the platform.
Yeah, employees versus gig workers.
Right. So I'm an independent contractor.
Yes.
With those. So they do not have at the state, and really anywhere, we're just not equipped for this yet. We don't really have a good regulatory framework for what if the thing that you're doing for work with your home, whatever it is, what if it doesn't fit neatly into the category for regulation, taxes, and other purposes that we have, right? How do we manage the possible downsides? How do we ensure that people are safe? How do we, and this is a problem with again, like the gig driving as well, and the ride share.
Not having benefits and stuff like that, insurance, all that.
Well, Uber. Do you guys know what government agency in Colorado regulates Uber and Lyft?
No.
I had to guess. Would you think it would be like the Department of Labor and Employment?
I thought it would be like CDOT.
I thought like CDOT.
The Public Utilities Commission.
Wow.
Okay.
I know.
Wow.
I know. It's a little weird, right? Yeah. So, and the PUC has increasingly become like a bureaucratic black hole that if you want something to be it's regulated, the state's got it, they're taking care of it, you put it under the PUC. That's what you do. It's a
catch-all.
It's a 3-member commission they're a catch-all, and they're the things that are being kind of piled onto them at this point. It's they're not equipped for that. They're not equipped for that. And we have a similar problem, I think, with the Airbnbs and the rideshare and the third-party delivery service, and there's more of it, right? There's TaskRabbit, and there's
Instacart,
the shopping things, and it's kind of getting weirder too. You should, I'll probably, by the time you all air this, it'll be just faded away in the social media feeds. But I have a couple of photos to share when I have a chance of some of the things DoorDash is doing now. I picked up an order today. I just got work for an hour or two at a time, right? I picked up an order this afternoon between my errands, and it was like, I'm sorry, I'm kind of like off topic here. It was the weirdest thing because the address, I was like, this address doesn't have anything there. I know it doesn't. That is an abandoned shopping center. I know where this is. It can't possibly be it. So I tried another merchant that's nearby, and I was like, do you have this order? And they're like, no, that's across. I was like, no, I get where the address is, but like there's nothing. Okay, whatever. I'm gonna go look. There's nothing there. There's something there. They have taken over an abandoned store and stocked it with convenience store items, and you can like order snacks and things on DoorDash, and they'll fill. So they're a merchant now. They are also a merchant now, as well as a delivery service, because you can just go. It was just sort of like I was like, this feels really weird. This is a first for me, and I've been door dashing for like almost 4 years.
That sounds like the ghost kitchen, but it's like a ghost 7-Eleven. That it's like an
Right?
abstraction of an abstraction of an idea. It's like, here, you can deliver this, but here, take these pills so that you can imagine what this convenience store is in your head, and then you make it in your own over 40 years using a farm or something, and it's like, what the heck is this? This is absurd.
Right. Yep.
Well, the virtual kitchens at least kind of make sense. It sounds super silly, but they make sense to me, right?
Yeah.
Because
there's no storefront. You don't walk. You just walk in to pick it up, the food or whatever, right?
Yeah.
No. So they're embedded in another restaurant. So what it is that there are like some chain restaurants in particular that could not adapt very well to COVID, right? Like I don't want to mention any businesses by name because I'm not trying to like make anybody like have bad feelings about a business or anything, but like just maybe like a place that just does seafood that you would want to eat like as soon as it's ready. You don't order that to go. You don't want it like that.
Yeah.
So they might do something like, oh, hey, we've got this alternate menu. You cannot order it in person. We will not give it to you, but you can order it on DoorDash and somebody will come pick it up and bring it to your door. And so they are a virtual kitchen that is within this seafood restaurant, and you can order a sandwich from them. And so that's kind of where those are actually. And they're also like Chili's does several of them so that they can have several different kinds of menus, and it's a whole thing.
Like Red Robin does Donato's, which was kind of before that whole thing, but the Donato's is like an eastern pizza chain, and then it's like, here, this is how you make pizza
in the restaurant. You can also order it in the restaurant. I'm talking about like a menu that you cannot order in the restaurant.
It doesn't even exist. Everything's strange.
They act like it's not there.
The future is weird.
Yeah, for example of that is the Mexican food place that just put one of their items back on the menu that you can't actually order unless you're using something like Grubhub or DoorDash
or the app
or the app.
Yeah. You can't go there and say, hey, I want this item that you said you were bringing back. You have to order it.
They want you to download their app.
And the item's not even that good. I mean, it's good. It's okay.
Don't even start.
So, we're coming on. We're fine. We're good.
This is gonna be the kind of show this is.
This is exactly the show.
Probably listen to it pretty frequently.
This is exactly the show that this is going to be, and so this is what we're aiming for.
So would you like me then to give a brief as possible overview of my housing policies?
Yes.
What I expect I can accomplish in the state ledge and what. Okay.
Yes, I would love that, and then I would also love to hear what notes maybe we didn't touch on or information you dug out.
Before you start, Nick, I am going to disappear for a moment because if I don't go to the bathroom, I'm gonna blow up.
Okay.
So
I can't be liable for that. My insurance, my podcast insurance doesn't cover this. So, Stephanie, for our viewers and our listeners, I'll put up a privacy screen on the feed. You'll understand. But yeah, Stephanie, go ahead.
Okay. So, like I said, we have a lot of like layers of government that make this complicated, right? So, some of the things that are being demanded at the state legislature, we actually can't do there. The things that cities and counties and towns have to do. But there is some regulatory framework and some other resources that the state can provide that will incentivize cities to do the right thing, and sometimes there might be a stick element as well, some disincentives. So one of those, one of the first big things that I want to do is to issue a one-time study of all of the zoning laws, transportation policies, renters' rights, like local ordinances that impact renters, and all of the housing policies that local and county governments do, and do a thorough study of how they actually work and how they actually function, and whose ideas are working and whose ideas are not working. Because right now we're having a big debate where we're basically just kind of yelling past each other about what would and would not improve the housing situation. Mostly people sort of kind of hollering back and forth at each other about unintended consequences, right? Like, yeah, there's always going to be some unintended consequences. We still need to talk about what's going to work. I would like to issue that one-time study so that we can actually have on state record a report that tells us what is and is not good for housing development, that ensures that it stays affordable, attainable, safe, stable, reduces homelessness. And I think there are a few things that I anticipate that study would reveal. One of them is that the addiction to growth is not serving us.
Right. It does. Growth does not pay for itself.
Growth does not pay for itself. And we can see it over and over again, especially in commercial development. And Colorado Springs is over commercialized as a city. So we actually need to figure out how to
begin with.
We need to figure out how to remove some, like kind of rehab some of our commercial space so that it can be mixed use or residential. And we haven't even begun to tackle that, right? So that's one thing that I think that study would probably reveal. And another is that if we did some form of rent stabilization, it would improve things without costing us developers, because people still want to develop anywhere where they can make money. That's still a thing, right?
What?
If we know that people want to be in Colorado Springs and people want to build here, I don't think that we as a city need to keep acting like, I don't know, like we should just be grateful that people want to build houses and businesses here. Like, no, they should be coming to us with a good offer. This is a wonderful and beautiful place to live, right? Like, and there's no shortage of offers. So whatever is going on behind closed doors and smoke-filled rooms and whatever, right? Like
the cloakrooms,
that needs to be revealed for what it is.
Yeah.
And the really big thing, and this would be something that I just think if your listeners should really walk away with, if they forget everything else, and they think, that some of that sounds kind of like radical leftist stuff to me, and like even if I'm into it, I don't think I can sell other people on it. Like, sure, if you cast aside all that and you just walk away with one thing, what Colorado Springs needs more than anything to ensure adequate supply of affordable housing and a sustainable plan for keeping everybody housed, we need more LIHTC. We need more low-income housing tax credits. That is a federal program. It subsidizes affordable housing so that it absorbs the otherwise lack of return on investment that you would get if you built something cheaper than what you would like to be able to build, if that makes sense, right? So we're talking about stabilizing the cheapest apartments, the most affordable units, and that can go for detached single-family houses as well. Yes. The thing about LIHTC is they don't just give it out to anybody. Our federal government actually does not want to just give tax credits away willy-nilly to builders just because they say, you know, I'm going to build a 200 unit apartment complex and they're all going to be cheap. Now give me some tax credits. You have to apply for it. It's not free or easy to obtain those. There are a couple of developments here that you all are probably aware of. One of them is being built by The Place, and it'll be a permanent supportive housing structure for homeless youth to move into. Yes. And then also there is the Commons, which is actually kind of in my district, kind of down the street here, closer to the Citadel, which Homeward, Pikes Peak, and a whole number of other organizations went in on, basically.
Gotcha. And
in order to get those tax credits are not easy. and they shouldn't be,
getting them.
They're
Right.
federal tax credits, right? They're not easy to get.
Right.
And they shouldn't be. It should be difficult because we don't want to waste that funding. But what it accomplishes for us is that it brings down the rate of the lowest rent that you can get, so that everything else that's above that is already starting from a lower point. And that's a really critical thing for us to have for the whole market. It's the reason why you should want federally subsidized low-income housing in your neighborhood, even if you never plan to live in it, even if you don't have friends who would ever live in it, even if you think, you know, in your hubris, if you're one of these people, even if you think that anybody who wants to keep a roof over their head can always just get a better job, and you don't have any concern about people who live on the minimum wage, you still want this.
Yeah.
You want it because it brings down the rate of rent for modest renters, which brings down the rate of rent for higher income renters, which brings down the home price for low income home buyers, which brings down the price for middle income home buyers.
Yep.
It's a stabilizing force. Some things that we need in order for that to occur: more public transportation.
What?
More public transportation.
No.
Yeah, we're gonna we're gonna be talking plenty about multimodal transportation.
We cannot solve the affordable housing crisis without tackling multimodal transportation. It is impossible. They are inextricably linked. And of course they are, right? Wherever you find a place to live, you have to be able to get to and from work, to and from school, to and from shops. You have to be able to live, work, and play in your community, and that means leaving your house.
What?
And
Yes.
if the only way to leave your house is in a car because that's the dress code, then you're out of luck. So
Cars are a poor
between
tax.
The traffic congestion, the dangers, the air pollution, and the fact that it means
Noise.
we can't get the affordable housing stock that we need. Ooh, we really can't afford not to do multimodal transit.
Right. And
So,
and
I understand this is like every right winger's worst nightmare, right? They're like, first you're
Yes.
talking about affordable rent, now you want more buses. When will it stop?
and you want them in our neighborhood.
Never.
And I think there's
Never
this.
stop.
And I think the NIMBYism, I think there's also this kind of conjured image of if you let how properties and developments either A, be developed as affordable housing, or B, receive federal tax credits, that means that you're letting them in. And unfortunately, that's a very scary dichotomy, like just entire allegory, because traditionally, when the government assists in housing, people think of these massive, you know, Judge Dredd style towers that are not maintained. They're like ghettoized. They're off in a corner of the town that no one wants to deal with. And it doesn't have to be that way at all.
Well, no, not only does it not have to be that way, that is actually the result of excessive R1 zoning and suburbanization.
Right.
Like that's why that happens.
Also
that's
racism.
That's why.
But
right. Well, and there's a racial component to that, right? We know about the
redlining,
white flight and the redlining and all of that, right?
Right.
So that whole image of like an oversized, cold, you know, Soviet style cinder block apartment complex.
Yes.
The reason why complexes like that need to be built that way is because there's only a tiny sliver of every city where you're even allowed to build it. If you did more gentle infill, if we did flex zoning, if we did more mixed use, you could have less of that. You could have like, you could have a block that's like 80% of the structures are detached single family houses, and then there's a handful of duplexes, and then the next block would be, I don't know, 2 to 5 single family houses and a larger apartment building and maybe a duplex or 2 on the corner, right? You could do that, and you're not going to be next to a massive apartment building, but you're also not going to be stranded from your neighbors and stranded from businesses, and driving 30 minutes to and from everywhere that you need to go. Because cities are planned. And
I don't mean the developers coming and just developing the stuff and it's over. Yeah.
Well, and I don't mean that cities should be planned. I mean that they are planned. If we don't do it, they will.
What do you think city council
right?
does?
That's the rub.
That is city. If I swear to God, just watch city council, and half of their meeting is just the mayor sent them a bunch of schematics for this stuff, and they just do land rights approval, and this we're gonna build a new Dunkin' Donuts
But
here.
who's engineering all of that? The developers engineer all of that.
Of course, they're
Well,
like
and
the
that's,
one.
and that's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our,
So,
our
you know,
city planning has
Right.
become, who's willing to throw the most amount of money at things, and
Or cry the
You know,
loudest when they don't get what their way.
yeah,
Like when, say, a cat hasn't had enough to eat, or maybe just wants to eat more, and they just keep meowing, and they meow and they meow, and maybe it's 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning, and this cat keeps meowing and meowing, and eventually the city council gets out of bed and is like, "Okay, I'll feed you," and then the cat doesn't learn anything about how things are supposed to work and doesn't establish any good habits, and we are the ones who just keep feeding the cat whatever they want, whenever they want, at any time that they meow. And it sucks, especially now that we do have this massive undeveloped swath of Banning Lewis that is effectively like a third of the city's total land area. And
Okay, it really just sounds to me like you're saying Captain Kirby is screaming at you in the background right now. Is that what's happening?
listen, I'm not saying that my cat is a developer, but maybe the developers are cats. Fat ones, you could say, without the cool
Right.
hats that are totally kind of messing it up for the rest of us. Anyway, we have been on an incredible journey here. Emily, were there any notes that you summoned that you really wanted to touch on?
The big thing that I wanted to touch on is, first and foremost, because of the new rules that have come into place, people really need to be aware of what rights they have as renters. Everything from, it's storming like crazy over here. Everything from the fact that your landlord cannot raise your rent more than one time a year. One time in 12 months. It does not matter if you are on a month-to-month lease. It does not matter if you've signed a multi-year lease. One time a year. That's all they can raise. They also cannot, put you into bankruptcy with late fees. They can charge one $50 late fee. That's it. It does not matter how late you are with your rent. They cannot charge you any more than that until they take you to court. Then they can charge you for attorney's fees. And then as far as, what was the other thing? The leases, the late fees. And with the late fees, they cannot charge you a late fee until your rent is 7 days late. So if your rent is due on the 1st, they cannot charge you a late fee until the 8th. If your rent is not due till the 3rd, you on and on.
Right.
So there are some things that have been done that offer a small manner of protection. And what so many of these landlords depend on is you not knowing your rights.
Right.
If you don't know, then they're going to do whatever they want to take your money, because that's what they do. The only reason, on top of that, it is also, landlords can raise your rent as much as they want to that one time a year. If they want to raise your rent $500,
If you want to double it.
There's nothing saying that they can't.
Right.
Because they'll find someone.
They just have to tell you 60 days in advance in writing that they're raising your rent. Regardless of how much they're going to raise it. And if you're not going to be able to afford it in 60 days, well, I guess you need to look for a new place to live and hope that something is available.
That is
Right.
thunder right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why my dog is losing his mind.
Yeah.
I hope that this airs soon enough for this date to make an impact, but One thing people should do is go to coloradosprings.gov, and it's like /renters 101. But if you just go hunting around for it, you'll see it. And they do quarterly, they host a renters' rights workshop.
Yes.
And that's not just hosted by the city. There are a variety of organizations that weigh in on that. One of them is the Justice Center of Colorado Springs, which I highly recommend. Just go to Justice Center COS, like justicecentercos.com. Anyway, Google them. They are the nonprofit arm of the El Paso County Bar Association. I did a program with them. I was a housing ambassador for a few months. I was actually their first cohort of that program, so I kind of helped establish what it's even going to be on account of just being in the first round. But they will give it to you straight. Like, what is it? The big thing to understand is that you don't have a ton of rights as a renter, but it is in fact a business agreement with your landlord, right? It is, the state of Colorado overwhelmingly interprets a residential lease as a private contract between two. What do they say? A voluntary contract between two private entities is kind of the operative phrase, right?
That's
which is really unfortunate because voluntary is kind of a weird word to use when you're talking about housing, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the way the law is currently written and the way that it functions for residential leasing, you are considered to have agreed to this lease. So whatever it says, you're bound to, and you should know your rights within it
yes,
as
100%.
well as you possibly can. So the next one that is coming up, and interestingly, the theme is Know Your Lease, is Tuesday, August 9th. So, and you probably have that in your notes as well.
We will definitely be there before August 9th. Yeah.
Okay. They usually have a Zoom component, or they're just virtual, so that you have more options than only attending in person. But we have such limited rights for renters as it is. Know what your rights actually are, so that you can hold bad landlords accountable. I mean, they are technically bound
and they
by
should
the law.
be held accountable.
Right.
They should. 100%.
The key there, though, right, is that, like, technically, you are two equal parties, and it's a voluntary yada yada yada. But, like, at the end of the day, who probably has more power? Who probably has more resources?
Who has the leverage?
And we know who that's going to be. Who has the most leverage? Right.
Right.
So, I support legal representation for anyone facing eviction.
100%.
It's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to fund at a county level. You would want to tackle it by judicial district anyway. But I don't even know where to begin on how critical that is. Like 90 odd % of people who are facing eviction who go into it with legal representation get to stay. Because most evictions are bullshit, basically. At the end of the day, most evictions are bullshit. They're avoidable. Most of them are avoidable. So, a big thing for us to work on in terms of renters' rights is just the legal representation. Because the law itself can be as fair as can be, and it doesn't matter if you can't enforce it.
Right. Or if you don't understand it.
Yeah.
Steph, thank you so much for coming in and talking. This is a very critical topic here in Colorado Springs, and you were one of the first people I could think of that was a lightning rod to talk about it. But let's close out with you. Where can we read more about you? Where can we support you, help your campaign? Where can we find you on the internet, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. So my website's really easy. It's just stephanievigil.com. Vigil, by the way, looks like Vigil, but rhymes with beach hill. That's how you remember that.
Okay. All right.
So I'm really easy to find online there. And then all of my socials are Vigil for HD16. I am on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok lately. I have.
You've been TikToking.
over on the TikTok. Wow, that makes me sound old. I shouldn't say that just anywhere. You guys are fun, and I'm sure your audience is fun, but that might not land well in some crowds. It sounds very boomer like.
Stop, you're fine.
But I'm an elder millennial, so I'm close enough.
Yeah.
So you can find me there. This is the kind of campaign we win this at the doors. We win this through conversation and connection with the community, and really the only other big need outside of people like knocking doors, making calls, and filling out postcards is to fund that effort. So we thrive on small donations. I have an army of $5 to $20 donors. We're not a well-fueled campaign. We're not taking like big corporate PAC dollars. It's not that kind of race. So we are funded almost entirely. Yeah, right. That's actually really hard to pull off in Colorado for a political campaign, which is interesting.
Yes, it is.
Pretty good laws around that.
That's
The
very
independent
good.
expenditure committees, a little less so. Some issue committees, a little less so. But for candidate committees, it's like, here's the amount that an individual can give you, and if you take money from like a donor committee, the donor committee has strict rules, and so yeah, give your $5, is what I'm saying.
Stephanie, thank you so much. Of course, and we're bringing you back again. We have so much to talk about and so much more fun to have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Emily, that was a really great interview.
Yes, it was.
We had so much fun on that interview that we just had.
That we just did.
I learned so much. I'm, again, so glad to have Stephanie on. I know we already said it like 2 or 3 times while she was in there. But thank you, Steph, for coming on. We're going to have her on in the future to talk about all kinds of stuff. And
absolutely.
It was very enlightening. And I just want to touch on really quickly that, yes, we did. It was a kind of a shock to us as well, to talk about the shooting in Texas, and I'm glad that we touched on that. We're not a current events podcast. That's not the goal. Our goal is to talk about our city, but something like that can happen anywhere in America, and it can happen here. And so going forward, those are topics that we are going to explore. It maybe not be minute to minute, but we're gonna go there because it relates to the city, and we love the city so much. So, I didn't have anything else. I think we covered it all. Emily, do you want to get us out of here?
Badly Needed and Long Overdue is a podcast about shaking things up in a conservative city. It has been hosted by Nick Raven and myself, Emily Lewis. You can watch the video version of this show on YouTube at youtube.com/Badly Needed Podcast. And listen to us in podcast form anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also find us at Badly Needed Podcast on Instagram, at Badly Needed COS on Twitter, at Badly Needed Long Overdue Podcast on Facebook, and Badly Needed Podcast on TikTok.
Excellent. We're Badly Needed and Long Overdue. Absolutely. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah. Tava.